Hello and welcome on Watches TV. Welcome on this first edition of Primetime of the year. And of course, a massive Happy New Year to all from Geneva. We wish you the super best for 2022. Health, of course, for you and your loved ones. Naturally, the rest of the good stuff that comes with, including, why not, having the pleasure of acquiring a few new watches here and there. But I can promise you that it's going to be a powerful Viva Watchmaking year for both you and us. And yes, to mark this new year, well, why not start with a shocker, as I indeed wanted to go anonymous. Reason why I changed my glasses, well, actually, it's a much more inspiring story and related to this fabulous community we enjoy here on Watches TV. And you are now 150,000 subscribed to this channel, and it makes me and my small team extremely happy and proud to know this. Well, coming back to the glasses, well, first, my eyesight didn't really improve. And secondly, I had the great privilege of meeting one of you guys who simply and unexpectedly knocked on the door here in the old town of Geneva. And we had a great conversation, with one which ultimately resulted in these new frames that are all handmade, a lot of parallel with our beloved industry in terms of craftsmanship, frames that are exclusively made in the Netherlands. And listen to this, it's all gold. Quite crazy, right? Well, more info at the end of this video. So for this first edition, the idea is to come back on some of the highlights and tendencies of the previous year, good and bad ones, some subjectivity there, and also talk about what to expect in 2022, whether in terms of events and so forth, but also we'll give you a little update on the latest news, including our major project announced for our 10th anniversary, the glossary. So off we go. Last year was our second year under this strange pandemic situation, with the main consequence of accelerating the evolution of the industry. So on the brand side, we have stronger players getting stronger, others surfing as they can, and what to say about the almost insolent success of the independent watchmaking scene. Naturally, a success which delights me, since it's mainly this type of watchmaking that we have been defending on this channel for a very long time. One that I always thought was definitely more inspiring, creative and meaningful, and it sure seems that we are not alone. So yes, feels good, and without boasting too much, what I think you can still totally rely on Watches TV to bring you what is cool and hot, with our focus of bringing you along the behind the scenes of this industry, such as our recent video regarding Romain Gauthier, his setup, his journey, and a focus on the new Continuum collection. And by the way, congrats to him for having just been made a trustee of the Horological Society of New York, along with Mr. Roger Smith, the famous British independent watchmaker and pupil of George Daniels, so the first international people to get this honor. So yes, most of the independent brands have enjoyed a very strong acknowledgement of what they've brought up over the years, and it rewards their persistence and their originality. But now, the reverse of the coin for most of these brands is to face the tough challenge of allocating the best possible way their production. And I say this since a few of them have already pre-sold for the next few months, not to say a year or two, all the watches they have recently presented. And I give you a very concrete example with the launch of the MB&F collaboration with Bulgari and the revisited version of the LM Flying T Allegra, which were all sold on the day of its presentation during the Dubai Watch Week. Well, actually, many were sold even before the official presentation, and there are so many more examples of this. And it's naturally great for all these guys, but you really have to remember that it hasn't always been like that. And over the last 10 years, well, unfortunately, we've seen quite a few of these promising independent brands go down the drain, despite the fact of having often developed very interesting products. So those were indeed more complicated times, and the fittest went through. And when I say fittest, I generally mean those that didn't go too crazy, those that spent what was available, naturally taking some risks here and there, but a bit on the conservative side and smart on how to optimize the production on one side and develop the required visibility and engagement on the other. But most importantly, I think it fully demonstrates the evolution of consumer behavior. The fact that people are more and more educated, and I hope, that we've contributed to this with our videos. And people also are wanting to be a bit different, people that want to mark their singularity with a product that not many others will have. Of course, I mean, you still have the status dimension, but this one I believe is much less significant with this type of watchmaking. And you have more true watch lovers that are buying these timepieces today. And the other very interesting point is that you have much younger generation of aficionados involved, and they contribute to the hype around all this. I mean, not to mention bringing a touch of casualness, which makes things simply more fun and enjoyable. And look at the evolution of fashion and how streetwear and or casual sport chic has become much more mainstream in any given situation. I mean, the days of the strict three-piece suits and ties are slightly behind us, and this is reflected too by what people have on their wrist. I mean, the example of how successful sports steel watches have become illustrate this pretty clearly, and even a very serious brand like Gribble Force have introduced sportier models, and these are working nicely for them. So the dimension of fun and pleasure is indeed much more prevalent, and personally I really like this, and I also think that despite we are talking about products, I mean, this is even more so a people business, and the fact that generally independent watchmakers are more passionate and available about what they do counts a lot in this success. Well, coming back to the health of the entire industry, and we shouldn't summarize this only with what is happening at the Swiss level, but yes, 2021 seems to have been in general a rather good year. Regarding Switzerland alone, I mean, we don't have definite export figures, but they should be around the pre-pandemic 2019 results. Maybe even a bit better, so not bad, but again, it reflects the overall turnover and not the number of watches produced, because on that side, volumes continue to shrink quite significantly, and it does pose a threat. But talking about volume and what I just mentioned concerning those that are doing well, a consequence facing this high demand is that everyone is thinking of increasing their production. I mean, on one side, you want to seize the business opportunities, and it's just a natural instinct. And the other side, I mean, you don't want to dilute the appeal to your brand, not even talking about the risk involved by the investments required, more personnel, more machines, more space, well, more costs. Well, ultimately, and let's cut to the chase, I mean, we are going to see increased productions from quite a few players, the big guys like Patek, Rolex and AP, but also from such much smaller outfits. And I just hope everyone will be wise enough to do so very intelligently. But that's precisely where the fact of being independent is such a huge advantage, because at the end of the day, all these guys are entrepreneurs. They know how to take risk. They know how to think long-term, how to consolidate in a smart manner, something which by definition, and unfortunately, you won't have with publicly traded companies and groups, where the notion of immediate profit or short-term goals is often the only key driver, as managers' bonuses depend on it. Okay, I know it's a bit of a simplified way of looking at it, but you get my point. And one of the best ways to exemplify this is simply to think of last year's decision by both Patek followed by AP to discontinue respectively the 5711 and the 15202, something totally unimaginable with one of those group companies. Okay, so we have a few, the lucky and smart ones that are or will increase the production in the coming month, but even by doing so, I doubt it will be able to satisfy demand. I'm sure Rolex could produce twice as many watches and they would sell them all. But as I said, overall volumes in Switzerland are continuously going down, especially in the lower tier of the product pyramid, where it's becoming harder and harder to compete for your space on your wrist with smart watches mainly. But one also has to take into account the distorting factor represented by the Chinese market, with a dynamic which I think embellishes a little bit too much the true performance of some brands. I mean, the COVID situation has had a massive impact on travel retail, especially those cities relying on Chinese tourists to buy whatever was presented to them. And now this market has shifted physically to mainland China. But something extremely interesting to point out is that most of these big or small independent brands are not really exposed to the performance of China alone. On the contrary, it often represents a very small percentage of their business, whereas for some other players, well, any Chinese slowdown could impact them significantly and represents a massive risk, and it could well happen. Of course, I mean, we've all heard about some government measures to less expose the population to luxury goods, but I think the biggest concerns, the biggest risk concerns actually the fact that Chinese consumers' tastes are also likely to evolve, and for instance, this world of independent watchmaking will also start to be very appealing to them. Okay, it's not going to happen overnight, but at one point it will most certainly happen. But at the same time, you also have Chinese brands that are developing nicely, and some of them are doing pretty well on their home territory. I mean, here I just have a few examples in mind, such as these Celadon watches mixing different decorative techniques. But for me, the most important element is that at one point, the Swiss-made label simply won't be enough of an argument to sell anything to the Chinese consumers. Status counts a lot today, but with education, things will evolve, and I can promise you that Chinese consumers learn fast. Thus, the threat for those depending at 80% on that market alone, and there are a few. But at the same time, I mean, this situation, overall situation, is also an opportunity for others. I mean, we indeed have these super hot brands with the difficulty of getting your hands on any of their products, apart from paying a premium. But then there are other options. I mean, whether other independent brands that are also fully committed to what they do and which could represent a strong alternative, and I have a few names in my mind, but also young watchmakers that are starting their journey today. I mean, young guys and girls that are truly respectful of the art dimension of watchmaking, and people that are fully manufacturing and machining their components by themselves. I mean, it's just fantastic artisans that have strong, very strong values. Well, there are options, and I believe there will be even more of them in the near future. Okay, let's move on, but let's continue to talk market dynamics of 2021, and I have to make a special mention regarding e-commerce. And for those that had any doubt that one could apply this to watchmaking, well, I guess they are all now less dubious. I mean, basically everyone has gone down that route with the e-shops and so forth, but I think we can all acknowledge pretty easily that having an omni-channel approach is the right way to face this. I mean, digital and physical are complementary. They don't suppress each other. Of course, I highly doubt that Patek or Rolex will ever do so, but they have a different distribution and retail strategy. And if you just think about the volumes of watches from these two brands that have been sold online on the second-hand market, well, I mean, you see what I mean. And this e-commerce dimension is indeed even more apparent with the continuous evolution of precisely this second-hand market, dominated by online sales. I mean, this is a market which is also in a consolidating phase, as there won't be space for that many successful players, kind of a winner-takes-all game. And we saw some of them flexing slightly their muscles in 2021, and I'm thinking in particular of Chrono24 and Watchbox, and I have to say that I'm impressed with how the latter has developed over the last couple of years, and the influence of Watchbox is seriously significant. I mean, it's a platform capable of drying some specific models or brands out of the market by purchasing everything available, and then they have the cards in their hands in terms of fixing the level of desirability, meaning the price paid by the consumer to get his hands on specific timepieces. I mean, this is obviously kind of a shortcut in my understanding of the situation, but really quite impressive and bold. Of course, it requires a lot of cash, but they do have that. For instance, I mean, they've recently raised another $165 million, and their strategy went as far as the acquisition of De Bethune, and this could well be a hint of what to expect in the future. Still, in terms of business news, one story that really struck me is what happened with Breitling. If you want to see what I was thinking at the time of the acquisition by CVC Capital Partners, what we generally call a rather aggressive investment fund, well, I invite you to check this video done back in the summer of 2017 called The Season Finale of the House of Cards of Watchmaking. So it was this fund's first major investment in the luxury world, and to make a long story short, in 21 they sold 20% of Breitling at more or less the same amount of money they had paid for 100% of the company 5 years ago. So at the time, around 800 million Swiss francs. So in other words, and on paper, they almost five-folded their initial investment. Not bad, right? And personally, I don't really understand the math because despite the pretty strong development of the brand, I doubt today's balance sheet reflects this valuation paid by this other Swiss investment fund for it. I mean, of course, George Kern and his team have increased sales, most probably lowered costs at the same time, meaning mainly optimizing production and procurement in particular. Because on the marketing side, costs must have gone up. Anyhow, there are things which are sometimes a bit surprising, but I guess the world of finance has its own reasoning. Concerning other business ownership news, and at a very different level, where we were very happy to learn the takeover of Urban Jürgensen by our good friend Kari Voutilainen. And this one makes sense as he was the main supplier of the brand with his other companies, Comblemine, for instance. And I personally really like Urban Jurgensen. I know it has been quite difficult for them on the business, business-wise over the last few years, and hopefully we will update you on this soon with the man himself. But in a certain way, this takeover makes me slightly think when the Stern family took over Patek almost 100 years ago, and I clearly wish him the same level of success. But I guess we'll talk about this again in 100 years. But bravo and good luck with this. So still on the business side, what a year it has been for auction houses, with Philips again dominating the market, but Christie's made a nice return to the front of the scene. But what is really spectacular regarding Philips is that they managed to sell 100% of the lots presented by Oral Bax and his team, and sold 27 pieces above the 1 million Swiss franc mark. I mean, that's really impressive. But here too, it's also worth noting that the online side of the business has simply exploded, and people don't mind pressing this bid button above several hundreds or even millions of Swiss francs. Well, I don't see any sign of this market going down soon. There is a lot of money out there, not to mention what is happening on the crypto scene. And timepieces are seen as a strong and safe assets, and this in turn contributes to what I was saying previously regarding the hotness of some brands, since everything is mixed and intertwined today. And the last business subject I have to talk about is the evolution of the watch shows. Of course, this is quite heavily linked with the evolution of the COVID situation. And for instance, we just heard this morning that the German Inurgenta show supposed to happen in February in Munich has been cancelled. But so far, it seems we are going for a pretty intense watch industry gathering here in Geneva in the end of March and beginning of April, with the new version of Watches and Wonders, plus all the other events that will take place throughout the city. But the big question is, are such huge venues still so pertinent? I mean, we know we can now scrap Baselworld as an alternative, but are these big and costly shows still relevant? I mean, we lived without them for a couple of years. The business didn't stop, on the contrary. So yes, quite a few questions out there, especially when you put this in the perspective of how amazing an event such as the Dubai Watch Week can be. I mean, the Siddiqui family really got their format right, even got a special GPHG jury prize for it last year. And I am simply admirative of what has been achieved there. I just love this event and how meaningful I believe it is, what a true benchmark of what a watch-related event should be. So maybe more of these formats around the world would be a great solution. And what people love about them, I mean on the customer side, is how watchmakers and brand people are there to share with you. And it's precisely this human link which makes all the difference, something actually you could find in the atelier section of Baselworld. Okay, I think I have now talked quite enough, and just wanted to add that 2022 is a major year for us, and I sincerely can't wait to be more transparent regarding our glossary project. Everything is moving nicely in the right direction, but this is really an ambitious project and a super motivating one, and soon we will unveil the full strategy. I mean, we simply love to share education, and that's really our stance. And I know that if you're looking for some hard news type of info regarding the latest product launch, well, Instagram is probably more efficient, but we really have the feeling of creating content that we put on a shelf, a library of open knowledge. And again, thanks so much to our patrons that help us achieve this, and you are all welcome to join. And Joanna from our team will have the pleasure of taking good care of you. So to finish the story, I started in intro of this prime time regarding my glasses. Well, as mentioned, this really nice guy came to visit us. And as he noticed that I liked original glasses, well, he showed me what he was crafting, and I was quite impressed. His name is Arthur Alexanian. He is based in the Netherlands and has specialized in crafting handmade frames since he is a jeweler by trade. But he loves watchmaking and therefore uses finishing techniques that we are acquainted to, and also creates some special design patterns that mimic some of your favorite timepieces. Well, these glasses are all made by hand and require around 2 weeks of labor per pair, and the particularity is that everything you see is made out of solid gold. In my case, white gold, so it's pretty discreet. And since I used to have these square glasses, I wanted to remain in that style, and of course wanted some originality. But don't worry, I will still use my other glasses, which were also done with another friend of mine back some years ago. Anyhow, well, Arthur came back to me with this proposition, and I immediately fell for them. And in all honesty, since I'm wearing them, I have to say that I am quite impressed by the number of people that have made positive comments regarding them. They indeed have something special and unique. Well, if you're interested in having your very own pair, You will find a link in the description box below, directing you to his website. And I know they don't come too cheap, as you can expect, but I have to admit that in my case, we had a special deal. And Arthur, I thank you again for this really cool opportunity. Okay, and the very, very last thing, also related to our community, well, one of our patrons shared with us a funny story regarding a Tissot watch he recently saw, a regular type of watch with a central minute hand, but on the periphery of the dial you have hour markers, and they simply don't make any sense. Well, I'm quite surprised something as obvious as this managed to go through their control department, but I thought it was quite fun, and thanks for sharing this with us. Okay, now it's truly the end of this edition, and just again wanted to mention to you that we will shortly publish two incredible stories. One where watchmaking is seriously saving lives. Yes, you will be surprised, but such a beautiful story. And then we have an amazing interview with a 100-year-old man who shared with us his journey as a watchmaker here in Geneva. And just to give you an idea, he used to work for Rolex when there were only 17 watchmakers in their workshop. And at a time where Mr. Han Wilsdorf would pay a visit himself to these workshops. So just a fantastic moment. I really hope you will enjoy this. So again, all our very best wishes for this new year. Thanks so much for the relation we enjoy on this channel. Thanks for everything. Thanks to our patrons. See you real soon, and viva watchmaking. Happy New Year to you. See you soon.